You know Harrods. Everyone knows Harrods, the most famous department store in the world, where royalty shops and oligarchs spend more on handbags than most people earn in a year. 7 floors of pure luxury in the heart of Knightsbridge, serving the wealthy and the powerful since 1849. But what you see during opening hours, the pristine displays, the impeccable service, the glittering chandeliers, that's all carefully choreographed theatre, a beautiful performance that ends the moment the last customer leaves and the bronze doors lock for the night. I'm Emma Clark, and I've been working night security at Harrods for 18 months, not the glamorous daytime shifts where you might spot celebrities buying diamonds, but the after hours operations, the time when Harrods serves its real customers, the ones who's been shopping here much longer than any living person, who pay with currency that hasn't existed for decades, and who never, ever leave empty-handed. Here's what they don't tell you in the employee handbook. Harrods isn't just a department store, it's a collection point. After nearly 2 centuries of serving London's elite, the store has accumulated something far more valuable than money or merchandise. It's collected the desires, obsessions, unfulfilled wants of everyone who ever walked through those doors. And some desires are so powerful, so consuming, that death itself can't diminish them. What I'm about to tell you will sound impossible, but I've got proof. Security footage that shows things moving on their own. Sales receipts for purchases made by people who died decades ago. And 11 rules that every night shift worker learns by heart, because breaking them doesn't just cost you your job, it costs you everything. Getting a job at Harrods isn't like applying anywhere else. The interview process alone takes months. Background checks, psychological evaluations, references from previous employees going back years. They told me it was because of the high value merchandise, the celebrity clientele, the need for absolute discretion. But that wasn't the real reason. Night security at Harrods requires specific qualifications, the ability to see things that shouldn't be there, the strength to enforce rules that make no logical sense, and most importantly, the wisdom to understand that some customers should never be refused service, regardless of their current state of existence. The store itself is a masterpiece of Victorian excess, 330 departments spread across 7 floors, each one more opulent than the last. Egyptian escalators, mosaic floors, chandeliers that cost more than houses. During the day, it's controlled chaos. Tourists taking selfies, personal shoppers guiding clients, sale assistants maintaining that perfect Harrods smile. But at closing time, 9 PM sharp, everything changes. On my first night, Security Manager Patricia Blackwood gave me the standard briefing: patrol routes, alarm systems, emergency procedures. Professional, efficient, exactly what you'd expect from one of London's most prestigious retailers. Then she handed me a small leather-bound book. "Learn these rules," she said, her voice carrying 40 years of Harrods authority. "Follow them exactly. Your life depends on it, and so does the reputation of this store." The book was old, much older than it should have been for employee guidelines. The pages were yellowed, the leather worn smooth by countless hands. Inside, written in elegant script that belonged in a Victorian ledger, were 11 rules. Rule 1. The Egyptian hall must be cleaned every night, regardless of what appears on the floor. Rule 2. If customers enter after closing time, serve them normally. Check their payment method discreetly. Rule 3. Never refuse a sale to someone wearing period dress. Their money is always good. Rule 4. The Diana and Dodie Memorial must have fresh flowers daily. She still visits. Rule 5. If mannequins change position overnight, return them to their original poses before morning. Rule 6. The food hall serves all appetites. Some requests may seem unusual. Rule 7. Children asking for their parents must be directed to customer services, regardless of the decade they describe. Rule 8. If the lifts operate on their own, they're collecting customers from other floors. Do not interfere. Rule 9. Payment in old currency should be accepted and exchanged through special channels. Rule 10. The pet department serves all creatures, living and otherwise. Rule 11. If you see yourself shopping in the floor, leave immediately and don't return for 7 days. At the bottom, in Mohammed Al-Fayed's own handwriting, Harold serves everyone, the living, the dead, and those in between. These rules ensure exceptional service for all of valued customers. I laughed. Had to be some sort of elaborate joke, the kind of thing posh department stores do to make night security feel special. Seriously? I asked Patricia. Her expression remained perfectly composed. That Harold's training never breaks. Emma, you're not working at Argos. This is Harrods. We've been serving London's most discerning customers since 1849. Some of our clients have been shopping here for much longer than that. My first week was surprisingly normal. Night shifts at luxury department stores are usually quiet. Just security patrols, cleaning crews, and the occasional delivery. Harrods after hours was peaceful, almost serene. The only sounds were my footsteps echoing through marble corridors and the soft hum of climate control protecting millions of pounds worth of merchandise. But on my 8th night, I learned why they needed those rules. I was doing my 2 AM patrol through the fashion department when I noticed something odd. The mannequins in the Chanel display had moved, not dramatically, just slightly adjustments to their poses, their angles, the way their hands were positioned. Rule 5 flashed through my memory. If mannequins change position overnight, return them to their original poses before morning. I'd worked retail before. Mannequins don't move themselves. Someone was playing tricks on the new girl, trying to spook me with cheap pranks. I repositioned the mannequins according to the photographs we keep for each display, making sure each angle matched perfectly. Professional duty done, I continued my patrol. That's when I heard the voices. Soft conversation drifting through the jewellery department. Multiple people discussing carats and clarity, settings and stones. The kind of detailed conversation that happens when someone's making a serious purchase. But the store was closed, had been for 5 hours. I approached carefully, hand on my radio, ready to call for backup if we had a break-in. But what I found was much stranger than burglars. 3 customers examining diamond rings under the jewellery counter lights. 2 women and a man, all impeccably dressed in what looked like 1920s evening wear. The man wore a white tie and tails, the women draped in silk and pearls that caught the display lighting like starlight. They were solid, real, having a completely normal shopping conversation. "The emerald cut is divine," one woman was saying, "but I'm not so certain about the setting." "Cartier does exceptional work," the man replied, "though Tiffany has a certain American flair that's quite appealing." They noticed me approaching and smiled with the polite acknowledgement wealthy customers give to helpful staff. "Good evening," the man said. "We're looking for an engagement ring, something spectacular, naturally." Rule 2 was explicit. If customers enter after closing time, serve them normally, check their payment method discreetly. Of course, sir," I replied, falling back on standard Harrods customer service training. "I'll need to call our jewellery specialist for you." "Oh, that's quite all right," the woman examining the rings said. "We're quite familiar with the collection, been shopping here for years." She selected a stunning Art Deco piece, emerald cut diamonds surrounded by sapphires, easily worth £100,000. "This one, I think, Charles, What do you think? Perfect for you, my darling, Charles replied. Absolutely perfect. The woman turned to me. We'll take it. Certainly, madam. And how will you be paying today? She opened a beaded evening bag and produced a bundle of banknotes, but the money was wrong. Pound notes in denominations that haven't existed since the 1960s, bearing the image of King George VI instead of Queen Elizabeth. Rule 9. Payment in old currency should be accepted and exchanged through special channels. I processed the sale according to our standard procedures, though nothing about this felt standard. The payment system accepted the transaction without question, printing a receipt that showed the current date, but payment in historical currency, exchange rate applied. Lovely service as always, the woman said, admiring her new ring. Harrods never disappoints. Indeed, Charles agreed. We've been shopping here since our engagement in 1926. The quality is consistently exceptional. 1926? These customers have been shopping at Harrods for nearly a century. They walked towards the exit, their footsteps echoing on the marble floor. But instead of leaving through the main doors, which were locked and alarmed, they simply faded away, like morning mist touched by sunlight. I stood alone in the jewellery department, holding a sales receipt for £100,000 transaction, paid for with money that had been out of circulation for 60 years. Over the next few weeks, I began to understand what Patricia meant about Harrods serving discerning customers. The after-hours clientele was unlike anything I've experienced in my retail career. Rule 3 became relevant during my third week. Never refuse a sale to someone wearing period dress. Their money is always good. I was restocking displays in the designer handbag section when a woman approached the Hermes counter. She wore a magnificent Edwardian dress, bustle, high neckline, intricate beadwork that belonged in a museum. Her hair was arranged in the elaborate style of the early 1900s, and she moved with the practiced grace of someone born to wealth. Excuse me, she said, her accent placing her in the upper echelons of pre-war society. I'm looking for a travelling bag, something practical but elegant. I'm touring the continent next month. She was examining bags that cost more than most people's annual salary, handling them with the confidence of someone accustomed to luxury. But her dress, her manner, everything about her suggested she belonged in 1905, not 2025. Perhaps this one? I suggested, showing her a classic Hermes Kelly bag, very popular with discerning travellers. Oh, that's lovely, she said, opening and closing the clasp with appreciation. The craftsmanship is exceptional. How much? £45,000, madame. She didn't flinch at the price. Old money never does. Perfect, I'll take it. She opened a purse and began counting out gold sovereigns, actual gold coins bearing the image of King Edward VII, each one worth far more than its face value in today's market. Rule 3 was explicit. Their money is always good. I processed the transaction, watching our payment system somehow convert Edwardian gold into contemporary currency. The receipt printed normally, though it noted, antique currency, premium exchange applied. Wonderful service, the woman said, accepting her purchase in a Harrods bag that looked subtly different, green and gold, but with typographic that belonged in the earlier era. I do love shopping at Harrods, such reliable quality. She walked towards the lifts, but instead of pressing the call button, she simply stepped through the closed doors and disappeared. Rule 4 nearly broke my heart during my 4th week. The Diana and Dodie Memorial must have fresh flowers daily. She still visits. The memorial of Princess Diana and Dodie Al-Fayed is one of Harrods' most moving displays. Photographs, personal items, and fresh flowers change daily as a mark of respect. During opening hours, it's constantly visited by tourists and admirers paying their respects. But 3 AM on a Tuesday night, I found someone else there. A woman in an elegant evening dress, blonde hair perfectly styled, placing white lilies at the memorial. She moved with grace and dignity, clearly comfortable in the luxury surroundings. Even from behind, even in the subdued lighting, she was unmistakable. "They were young," she said softly, not turning around but somehow aware of my presence. "So much life ahead of them." I stood frozen, not knowing how to respond to the impossible. "The flowers are beautiful today," she continued, adjusting the lilies with practiced care. "White lilies were always my favourite. Dodie knew that." She turned then, and I saw her face clearly, the same face that had smiled from magazine covers, that had been photographed 10,000 times but never quite looked as radiant as she did now. "You're doing excellent work here," she said with warmth. "Harrods was always special to us. It's good to know it's being properly cared for." Your Highness," I managed, falling back on protocol that felt utterly inadequate. She smiled, transformative smile that had lit up rooms and heart across the world. "Just Diana, please. I'm not really royal anymore, am I?" She moved towards the escalator, her evening dress flowing around her like water. "Take care of this place," she called back. "It holds so many memories." And then she was gone, leaving only the scent of her perfume and the white lilies that seemed to glow in the memorial lighting. By my second month, I'd grown accustomed to serving customers who paid with Victorian coins and shopping for items that wouldn't be fashionable for another 50 years. But Rule 7 introduced me to the most heartbreaking aspect of after-hours Harrods. Children asking for their parents should be directed to the customer services, regardless of what decade they describe. I was checking the toy department when I heard crying, soft, heartbreaking sobbing that immediately triggered every protective instinct I possessed. I followed the sound to find a little girl, perhaps 6 years old, standing lost among the stuffed animals. She wore a blue wool coat and white gloves that looked like they belonged in the 1950s. Her hair was perfectly curled, held back with a ribbon, and her small patent leather shoes were polished to a shine. "Hello, sweetheart," I said gently. Are you alright? Are you alright? Are you alright?" She looked up with tear-filled eyes. "I can't find my mummy and daddy. We were shopping for Christmas presents and I got lost." "Don't worry," I assured her. "We'll find them. What are their names?" "Mr. and Mrs. Pembleton. We live in Chelsea. Daddy said I should choose any dolly I wanted for Christmas, but I got confused by all the pretty things." She pointed to the section of the toy department that displayed vintage dolls, beautiful porcelain faces, elaborate Victorian dresses, the kind of toys that belonged in museums rather than in children's hands. "When did you get separated from them?" I asked. "Just now," she said. "We were looking at Christmas decorations and there were so many people, and then I couldn't see them anymore." Rule 7 was explicit. Direct them to customer services, regardless of the decade they describe. I took her small, cold hand and led her through the corridors that seemed longer than they should have been, past departments that looked subtly different, older signage, vintage fixtures, merchandise arranged in styles that predated modern retail design. Customer services during after hours was staffed by a woman I'd never seen during day shifts. She wore a perfectly tailored suit that looked like a 1950s Harrods uniform, her hair styled in Victorian rolls, her manner professionally compassionate. "Lost your parents, dear?" she asked the little girl with kindness. "Yes, miss. Mr. and Mrs. Pembleton. We were Christmas shopping." "Of course you were. Christmas 1952, wasn't it? Lovely year for Christmas shopping. Don't worry, sweetheart. We'll have you back with them in no time." She led the little girl towards a lift I'd never noticed before, brass fixtures, manual gate, operated by an attendant in vintage Harrods clothing. "Going up to Christmas past," the operator announced. "All aboard for family reunions and holiday joy." The lift door closed, carrying the lost child back to Christmas 1952, where her parents were still waiting, still shopping, still believing their daughter was just exploring the toy department. Rule 8 revealed the most disturbing aspect of Harrods' after-hours operation. If the lift operates on its own, they're collecting customers from other floors. Do not interfere. I was doing my midnight patrol when I noticed the lifts moving constantly, floor indicators lighting up on sequence, the mechanical hum of counterweights and cables moving over time. But according to my security monitors, I was alone in the building. The lifts were collecting customers. I watched through the brass gate windows as the lifts filled with shoppers from different eras. Victorian ladies with their maids, 1920s flappers clutching beaded purses, 1960s socialites in mod dresses, 1980s power shoppers with enormous shoulder pads. Each lift carried customers from Pacific Decade, transporting them to departments that catered to their particular needs and tastes. The Victorian lift stopped at haberdashery and fine linens. The 1920s lift served cocktail ware and jazz age accessories. The 1980s lift headed straight for power suits and statement jewellery. Harrods wasn't just serving current customers, it was serving everyone who had ever shopped there, providing customer service that transcended death, fashion trends that spanned centuries, and shopping experiences that continued regardless of morality. But the most disturbing realisation came when I saw the newest lift, modern, sleek, designed for contemporary customers. It was heading up to departments I didn't recognise, serving shoppers who seemed familiar but wrong somehow. Future customers, people who hadn't even been born yet, shopping for items that didn't exist, paying with currency that hadn't been invented. Harrods wasn't just collecting the shopping desires of the past, it was accumulating the wants and needs of customers who wouldn't exist for decades. The crisis came during the January sales, when the boundary between past, present and future shopping experience collapsed entirely. Every rule accumulated simultaneously, creating a retail emergency that threatened to expose Harrods' supernatural customer base to the living world. It started with Rule 11. If you see yourself shopping in the store, leave immediately and don't return for 7 days. I was restocking the designer shoes department when I saw her, a woman trying on Louboutin heels, examining her reflection in the mirror with the critical eye of someone making an expensive decision. She looked exactly like me. Not similar, identical, same face, same hair, same clothes. But she moved with confidence as someone who belonged in this department, someone who could afford £1,000 shoes without checking her bank balance. She was me, but a version of me that somehow achieved the wealth and status to shop at Harrods as a customer rather than work here as security. Rule 11 was explicit: leave immediately. But as I backed away from designer shoes, I saw other impossible customers throughout the store. The after-hours clientele had expanded beyond historical shoppers to include people who couldn't possibly exist. In jewellery, I saw future versions of current world leaders, their faces lined with age, shopping for gifts to commemorate events that hadn't happened yet. In fashion, teenagers who wouldn't be born for another 20 years were trying on clothes made from materials that didn't exist. The men's department served customers from alternative timelines, versions of famous people whose lives had taken different paths. In one impossible scene, I watched an elderly Winston Churchill shopping for retirement clothes, apparently having survived to a peaceful old age in a world where World War II had ended differently. Harrods have become a nexus point where every possible shopping experience existed simultaneously. Past customers who had died decades ago, future customers who wouldn't be born for generations, and alternative customers from timelines that never existed. Patricia found me fleeing towards the exit. Temporal convergence. she explained calmly, as if this was a routine retail emergency. Happens every few years when customers' demand exceeds our ability to maintain chronological boundaries. All of Harrods' shopping history tries to happen at once. What do? Standard protocol: lock the store, let them shop until they're satisfied, then reset the temporary boundaries. By morning, everything will be normal. Through the security monitors, I could see impossible shopping scenes throughout the store. Victorian ladies buying smartphones, future customers purchasing clothes that change colour with their thoughts, and deceased celebrities shopping for items that would have changed history if they lived to use them. How long has this been happening? Since 1849, Patricia replied. Harrods has always been more than a department store. We're a fulfillment centre for human desire itself. Some wants are so powerful they create their own reality. The store reset itself just before dawn, reality snapping back into place like a rubber band. The impossible customers faded away, the temporal anomalies resolved, and Harrods returned to being merely the world's most famous department store. But I understood now why they needed the rules, why they paid security staff so well to work nights, and why some desires were too powerful for death to diminish. I still work night securities at Harrods. 18 months later, I've served customers from every era of London's history, processed payment in currencies that predate modern banking, and maintained customer service standards that make Harrods legendary. The 11 rules aren't just employee guidelines, they're protocols for managing retail that serves desires too powerful morality to contain. Some people want things so intensely that death becomes just another inconvenience in their shopping experience. If you ever visit Harrods during the opening hours, you'll see exactly what you expect. Luxury retail at its finest, serving the world's most discerning customers with unparalleled service and quality. But remember, as you shop among the beautiful displays and helpful staff, that some of your fellow customers have been shopping here much longer than you might think. Some have been loyal Harrods customers for over a century, and some will continue shopping here long after you're gone. Because at Harrods, customer service doesn't end with death, it just changes departments. Sweet dreams, and remember, everyone deserves exceptional service, regardless of their current state of existence. Before I tell you about the 7 rules that have kept me alive for 3 years at London's most haunted theatre, you need to understand something. These aren't health and safety guidelines from Camden Council. They're not union regulations or fire brigade requirements. These are survival instructions, written in blood by workers who came before me. My name's Michael Thompson, and I'm a stagehand at the Royal Lyceum Theatre in London's West End. What I'm about to tell you will sound absolutely mental, but I swear on my nan's grave, every single word is true. Because some jobs don't just employ you, they trap you. And once the theatre chooses you, there's only one way to survive the night shift. Follow the rules, all of them, always. The Royal Lyceum isn't just any theatre. Built in 1847, it's proper Victorian grandeur. Red velvet seats, ornate gold fixtures, and that old money elegance that makes American tourists go mental with their cameras. During the day, it's magical. Sunlight seams through the stained glass windows, illuminating dust motes that dance like tiny spirits. At night, that's when you learn why we have the rules. I got this job for a mate, Danny Walsh, who's been working there for 5 years. Decent bloke, Danny, but he had this haunting look about him, like he's seen things that normal people shouldn't see. On my first day, instead of the usual health and safety briefing, Danny handed me a laminated card. "Learn these by heart, Michael," he said, his face dead serious. "Your life depends on it." The card had 7 rules typed in old Victorian font. Rule 1. Never say Macbeth inside the theatre. Always call it the Scottish play. Rule 2. The royal box in the upper circle must never be occupied after 11 PM. Rule 3. If you hear piano music from the orchestra pit after closing, do not investigate. Rule 4. The basement dressing rooms are off limit between 2 AM and 4 AM. Rule 5. If all the lights in the theatre suddenly go out, remain completely still until they return. Rule 6. Never, under any circumstances, perform alone on the main stage after midnight. Rule 7. If you see a woman in a white dress in the upper balcony, leave the building immediately. I laughed it off. Come on, Danny, you're having a laugh. This some sort of initiation prank? His expression didn't change, not even a flicker of humour. Rule number 1, mate. You just said it. Don't do that again. The way he said it made my blood run cold. This wasn't banter. This was deadly serious. What happens if I break the rules? I asked. Danny looked around the empty foyer, then leaned closer. You ever wonder why this theatre has such high staff turnover? Why we're always hiring new people? I hadn't noticed, but thinking about it, the job posting had been up for months. People quit, I suggested. Some quit, Danny said quietly. Others, well, they learn why the rules exist, the hard way. My first 2 weeks went smoothly. I learned the ropes, helped with set changes for Romeo and Juliet, and got used to the building's quirks. The Royal Lyceum is old, and old buildings make noise. Creaking floorboards, settling timbers, pipes that groan in the walls, normal stuff. The other workers were a good bunch, but they all had the same look as Danny, like they were constantly listening for something, always checking over their shoulders. I put it down to typical London paranoia. It wasn't until my 3rd week that I understood. I was working the late shift, helping to strike the set after the evening performance. Most of the crew had gone home, leaving just me, Danny, and Sarah Mitchell, one of the lighting technicians. Lovely girl, Sarah, but she jumped at every shadow. It was 11:30 when we heard it. Piano music. Not just any piano music, the music of the night, from Phantom of the Opera. Crystal clear, echoing up from the orchestra pit below the main stage. Sarah went white as a sheet. Rule 3, she whispered, already packing up her equipment. But someone's obviously down there, I said, being the skeptical new lad. Probably just Marcus having a late practice. Marcus was our musical director, brilliant pianist, proper dedicated to his craft. Michael, no! Danny grabbed my arm as I started towards the pit stairs. Marcus went home 2 hours ago, and even if he hadn't, the music continued, hauntingly beautiful but wrong somehow, like it had been played by fingers that remembered the melody but had forgotten how to be human. The piano's been broken for 6 weeks, Sarah said, her voice shaking. Missing keys, snapped strings, it can't be played. But we could all hear it. Perfect pitch, perfect timing, but with an underlying wrongness that made your teeth ache. We need to leave, Sarah said. Now. But I was 23 and stupid. New job, wanting to prove myself. I'll just have a quick look. Could be someone messing about. I made it 3 steps toward the orchestra pit before the music stopped. Dead silence. Then, from below, we heard humming. A woman's voice, humming the same melody. The humming was off, like vocal cords that hadn't been used in a very long time. Danny didn't wait. He grabbed me by the jacket and practically dragged me towards the exit. "Move, now!" We didn't speak until we were on Shaftesbury Avenue, the theatre locked behind us, London's night traffic humming around us. "That," Danny said, lighting a cigarette with her shaking hands, "is why we have the rules." "Who was it?" I asked. "Eleanor Whitmore," Sarah said quietly. "She's been playing that piano for over a century." After that night, I took the rules seriously, but curiosity's a dangerous thing, especially when you're dealing with something you don't understand. I started researching the Royal Lyceum's history during my lunch breaks, digging through archives at the British Library and old newspaper records. What I found made my blood run cold. The Royal Lyceum had been built on the site of an older theatre that burned down in February 1846. The fire started during a performance of Macbeth. That's why Rule 1 exists. 17 people died in that blaze, including a young actress named Eleanor Whitmore. Eleanor had been playing Lady Macbeth when the fire started. She was also known for playing piano between acts to entertain the crew. Her body was never recovered from the ruins. But the rules weren't just about Eleanor. Over the decades, there had been incidents. In 1923, a stagehand named Thomas Price was found dead in the royal box. No cause of death could be determined by the coroner. He was discovered at 2:17 a.m. The official report noted that his face was frozen in an expression of absolute terror. In 1954, an actress named Margaret Holloway was rehearsing alone on the main stage for a late-night audition. Security found her the next morning, catatonic. She spent the rest of her life in Bethlehem Hospital, claiming that the lady in white had told her secrets about death that no living person should know. In 1978, during a power outage that affected the entire West End, 3 technicians working late moved during the blackout instead of staying still. 2 were found unconscious in the basement the next morning. The third, James Crawford, was never found at all. His toolbox was discovered in the Orchester pit. The more I learned, the more I understood. These weren't the theatre superstitions. They were survival instructions, written by people who'd encounter something that shouldn't exist. By understanding the rules and following them perfectly are 2 different things. Over the next few months, I witnessed each rule being tested. In November, a new lighting technician, cocky lad from Birmingham named Pete, decided Rule 5 was bollocks. During a planned blackout to test the emergency system, Pete kept working instead of staying still. The lights came back on after 30 seconds. Pete was standing exactly where he'd been, but his hair had gone completely white. He was staring at something none of us could see, tears streaming down his face. "She showed me," he whispered. "She showed me what happened to them all." Pete quit the next day. Last I heard, he was working at a cinema in Solihull. Wouldn't go near a theatre again. In December, a visiting director from the RSC insisted on using the Royal Box for a late-night creative session. Against all of our warnings, he stayed past 11 p.m. We found him the next day, sitting perfectly still in the box, staring at the stage. He was breathing, but completely unresponsive. The paramedics said it was like his mind had just switched off. He recovered after 3 days, but he couldn't remember anything about that night. He just kept saying, "She was beautiful, so sad. She just wanted someone to watch her perform." Each incident reinforced what Danny had told me on my first day. The rules weren't suggestions, they were the difference between going home to your flat and becoming another cautionary tale. But I was about to learn that knowing the rules isn't enough if you can't follow them when it matters the most. It happened on a cold February night, almost exactly a year after I started. I was working alone, something that should have been my first warning. The evening show had been cancelled due to a gas leak in the building next door, and I'd volunteered to do some maintenance work on the lighting rig. Overtime pay was too good to pass up, and besides, I'd been following the rules religiously for months. What could go wrong? Everything, as it turned out. I finished the maintenance work just after midnight. The theatre was silent, except for the usual settling noises and the distant hum of London traffic. I was picking up my tools when I heard footsteps above me. Slow, deliberate steps across the main stage. Rule 6 echoed in my mind. Never perform alone on the main stage after midnight. But these weren't performance steps. They were walking. I climbed the stairs from the basement, telling myself it was probably security doing rounds. The main stage was empty under the work lights, but the footsteps continued. They were coming from the upper balcony. Against every instinct, I looked up. There she was, a woman in a white Victorian dress, standing at the railing of the upper circle. Even in the dim work lights, I could see her clearly. Long dark hair, porcelain skin, and eyes that held a century of sadness. Rule 7. If you see a woman in a white dress in the upper balcony, leave the building immediately. But I couldn't move. She was looking directly at me, and when our eyes met, she smiled. It wasn't a pleasant smile. It was the smile of someone who's been waiting a very long time. Then she began to descend the stairs, not walking down them, descending. Her feet never touched the steps. She glided down like mist, her dress flowing around her as if underwater. As she moved, the temperature in the theatre plummeted. My breath came out in visible puffs, and frost began forming on the brass fixtures. "You said it," she whispered, her voice carrying impossibly well in the large space. "On your first day, you said the name. You called me back." I remembered my first day, when I laughed off the rules and said Macbeth in the theatre. "I've been waiting," Eleanor continued, now halfway down the grand staircase, "waiting for someone to call me home. Do you know what it's like, being trapped between acts for over a century, watching the same performance night after night, never reaching the final curtain?" That's when I tried to run, forget dignity, forget looking professional. I grabbed my toolbox and I sprinted for the exit. But the main doors slammed shut before I reached them. The locks turned by themselves with a sound like breaking bones. "The show must go on," Eleanor said behind me. When I turned, she was standing centre stage, exactly where she would have died in 1846. "You called me back with the forbidden word. Now you have to perform with me forever." The theatre began to change around us. The modern lighting rig faded, replaced by Victorian gas lamps. The contemporary set pieces dissolved, revealing the ornate 1840s stage design. I could smell smoke, hear the crackle of flames that had burned out over a century ago. "We'll start with the Scottish play," Eleanor said, her voice now echoing with supernatural authority. "The same play that killed me. You can be Macbeth, and I'll play Lady Macbeth one final time." I backed against the locked doors, my heart hammering against my ribs. "I don't know the lines." "You'll learn," she said, raising her hand. The temperature dropped further, and I could see my breath now. "We have eternity to rehearse." That's when the stage door burst open. Sarah Mitchell stood in the doorway, holding a large iron cross and shouting something in Latin. The moment she entered, Eleanor shrieked, a sound like steam escaping from a kettle, but filled with rage and disappointment. "Rule 7! Sarah shouted over the supernatural wailing. "You should have left immediately." "I couldn't move," I gasped as the Victorian stage began to fade back to modern reality. Eleanor was retreating, her form becoming translucent. "Next time," she hissed, her voice now barely audible. "Next time, I won't let you go." She vanished as the clock tower chimed 1 a.m. Sarah helped me to my feet, her hand shaking almost as much as mine. "She feeds on attention," Sarah explained as we left the theatre through the stage door. "The longer you look, the stronger she gets. That's why Rule 7 isn't a suggestion, it's an emergency exit protocol." "How did you know to come back?" I asked. I didn't go home," Sarah admitted. "I was worried about you working alone, being sitting in the pub across the street, keeping an eye on the building. When I saw the lights change inside, I knew something was wrong." The next morning, I found an envelope in my locker. Inside was a new laminated card with the same 7 rules, but there was an 8th rule added at the bottom in handwriting I didn't recognise. Rule 8. The theatre chooses its own. If you survive the direct encounter, you're bound to stay. Find someone to replace you, or she will come back. I've been trying to quit for 2 years now. Every time I hand in my notice, something happens. Equipment failures that only I can fix, accidents that require experienced hands, new workers who quit after 1 shift, claiming they heard piano music and couldn't find the source. Danny told me last week that he's been trying to leave for 8 years. Sarah's been here for 6 years, since she had her own encounter with Eleanor during her first month. "It's not really a job," Danny explained over pints at the pub. "It's more like custodialship. We're here to make sure she doesn't get too restless, to follow the rules so she doesn't have to remind us why they exist." I still work at the Royal Lyceum Theatre. Every night, I follow the rules, all 7 of them, plus the 8th one that appeared after my encounter. Every night, I hope that someone will apply for a job and actually stay long enough to learn what we've all learned. Because I've come to understand that some places don't just employ you, they own you. And the lady in white is always watching from the upper balcony, waiting for someone else to say the forbidden word, to break the rules, to give her another chance at finishing her final performance. So if you're thinking of applying for a job at a historic London theatre, remember what I told you. Learn the rules, follow them absolutely. And whatever you do, never, ever say the name of the Scottish play. Some words have power, and in the theatre, power can trap you forever. The curtain never really falls, it just waits for the next act to begin. BBC night staff workers alive since 1932. You need to understand something fundamental about the broadcasting house. What the public sees, the iconic Art Deco facade, the professional news broadcast, the reassuring BBC continuity announcements, that's just a daytime operation. When the sun goes down and the live audiences go home, when the last Today programme guest leaves and the final BBC News Bulletin airs, the broadcasting house becomes something else entirely. Something that predates television, predates radio, predates the very concept of mass communication. My name is Marcus Webb, and I've been a night engineer at the BBC Broadcasting House for 5 years. Not the new Broadcasting House extensions or the regional studios, the original 1932 building, the one with corridors that don't appear on any blueprint, studios that broadcast to audiences that don't officially exist, and transmission equipment that receives signals from places that aren't on any map. What I'm about to tell you isn't in any BBC employee handbook, it's not mentioned in any corporate training or health and safety briefing. The BBC Trust doesn't know about it, and if they did, they'll probably shut down the entire building. But every night staff worker knows the truth. From the engineers who maintain equipment that shouldn't function, to the security guards who patrol floors that officially don't exist, to the archivists who catalogue recordings of programs that were never made. The BBC doesn't broadcast to the living. During the dead hours, that's what we call the period between 2 and 6 AM, Broadcasting House becomes a transmission hub for voices that have been silent for decades, programs that ended before they began, and stories that were too dangerous to tell while their subjects were alive. What I'm about to tell you will sound absolutely mental, but I swear on the grave of John Riff himself, every word is true. Getting a job at the BBC isn't like working for any other broadcaster. The application process is legendary. Background checks that go back generations, psychological evaluations, competency tests that seem designed to measure your ability to handle the impossible, rather than your technical qualifications. They told me it was because of national security clearance requirements. Broadcasting House handles sensitive government communications, emergency broadcast systems, and classified transmission equipment, standard procedure for critical infrastructure. But I learned later it was because the BBC needs staff who can cope with the older broadcast. The programmes that were commissioned but never aired, recorded but never transmitted, cancelled for reasons that had nothing to do with content and everything to do with the safety of the living. Broadcasting House is an Art Deco masterpiece, opened in 1932 as the Temple of British Broadcasting. 8 floors of studios, control rooms, offices and technical areas. The building was designed by George Val Meyer to be a cathedral communication, a place where voices can reach every corner of the British Empire. But it's the spaces between the official floors that make Broadcasting House unique, sub-levels that don't appear on building schematics, studios accessible only through maintenance passages, archives stored in rooms that seem larger inside than the building itself could accommodate. On my first night, Chief Engineer Patricia Hartwell gave me the standard briefing, equipment maintenance schedules, emergency procedures, transmission protocols, all very professional, very BBC, very by the book. Then she handed me a folder marked Confidential, Night Shift Protocols. "Don't open this until your second week," she said, her BBC trained voice carrying absolute authority. "If you last that long, you'll understand why you need it." "What's in it?" I asked. Patricia's expression remained perfectly composed, the way BBC staff are trained to handle any crisis. "Instructions for managing the dead hours, the period when Broadcasting House serves a different audience." The dead hours between 2 AM, when the last scheduled programmes end and the BBC switches to overnight broadcasting. Officially, this means automated music programmes, world service feeds and emergency standby systems. Unofficially, it means Broadcasting House becomes something much stranger. My first week passed normally. Day shifts are exactly what you expect from the BBC. Professional, efficient, slightly chaotic in a way that live broadcasting always is. Studios humming with activity, producers rushing between meetings, presenters rehearsing scripts, engineers maintaining equipment that keeps Britain connected to the world. But Broadcasting House at night is very different. The building feels larger, older, more aware of its own history. Corridors that seem straightforward during the day become labyrinthine after dark. Lifts travel to floors that don't appear on the buttons, and the transmission equipment starts receiving signals that aren't on any frequency allocation list. On my 8th day, I opened the confidential folder. Inside was a collection of documents dating back to 1932, typewritten memos updated with handwritten additions from decades of night shift workers. Rule 1. Never interrupt a broadcast from Studio B4. It was sealed in 1956 for a reason. Rule 2. If you hear Lord Rife's voice over the internal tannoy, respond respectfully, but do not follow instructions. Rule 3. The archive on sub-level 3 must be accessed only with written permission. Some recordings should never be heard. Rule 4. During air raid sirens, all staff must report to the 1941 shelter, even though the war has ended. Rule 5. If transmission equipment receives signals from the Radio Free Europe after 1989, report immediately. Rule 6. The 1960s pirate radio transmitter in the basement must never be switched on. Rule 7. Presenters who died during live broadcasts may continue their programs. Do not cut their feeds. Rule 8. If the emergency broadcast system activates without government authorization, evacuate the building. Rule 9. Children's programs recorded after midnight must be destroyed before sunrise. Rule 10. Do not respond to requests for the real news. Official BBC editorial policy implies to all broadcasts. Rule 11. If studio equipment operates itself, check the program schedule for the date of malfunction. Rule 12. Recordings of events that haven't happened yet must be filed in the future archive. Rule 13. During the dead hours, you are not just maintaining equipment, you are maintaining the boundary between information and disinformation, between truth and something more dangerous. At the bottom, in Lord Rife's own handwriting, the BBC mission is to inform, educate and entertain. Sometimes we must protect the public from information that would do more harm than good. These rules ensure that protection continues beyond the grave. My second week started quietly enough. Night shifts at Broadcasting House are usually peaceful. Minimal staff, automated systems handling most broadcasts, just a skeleton crew to monitor equipment and handle emergencies. But Broadcasting House during the dead hours operates on different principles than daytime BBC. It was Tuesday night, around 2:30 AM, when I encountered my first supernatural broadcast. I was doing routine maintenance in the engineering section when I heard something that shouldn't have been possible. A live program coming from Studio B4. Studio B4 had been sealed since 1956. According to the building schematics, it was converted to storage space decades ago. But the sound was definitely coming from behind the sealed doors, and the studio monitoring equipment showed active transmission. Rule 1 was explicit. Never interrupt a broadcast from Studio B4. It was sealed in 1956 for a reason. But I was new, curious, and trained to investigate any unauthorized broadcast activity. I found the maintenance access to Studio B4 and listened through the door. Inside, I could hear a BBC presenter delivering what sounded like a perfectly normal radio program. Received pronunciation accent, professional delivery, the measured cadence that BBC announcers perfected in the 1950s. Good evening and welcome to Voices from the Other Side. I'm your host, James Morrison, and tonight we're discussing the aftermath of the Swiss crisis with guests who experienced it firsthand. But the Swiss crisis had ended in 1956, and James Morrison had been the presenter who died live on air during a heart attack in Studio B4, the reason the studio was sealed. I pressed my ear closer to the door. The programme continued with what sounded like interview segments, but the guests were discussing events that happened in 1956, political developments that shouldn't have been known about because they were dead. Mr. Eden, how do you reflect on the handling of the crisis, given what we now know about its long-term consequences for British foreign policy? Anthony Eden had died in 1977, but his voice was unmistakably clear through the studio monitors. Well, James, I think if we'd understood then what became apparent in the 1960s and 70s, we might have approached the situation differently. I was listening to dead politicians being interviewed by a dead presenter about events that occurred after their deaths. The programme continued for exactly an hour, concluding with Morrison's familiar sign-off, "This has been Voices of the Other Side, bringing you perspectives that transcend mortal limitations. Good night, and remember, death is just another assignment." The studio fell silent. When I checked the transmission monitors, there was no record of any broadcast from Studio B4. According to the equipment, the studio had been inactive all night. The next morning, I asked Patricia about Studio B4. "James Morrison," she said without surprise. "He's been presenting that programme every Tuesday night since 1956. One of our most reliable broadcasters. Actually, never misses a show, always professional, maintains perfect BBC standards even in death." "But he's dead." "Yes, but he's still under contract. The BBC doesn't terminate employment just because of morality. We're very loyal to our staff." "What's the programme about?" Patricia poured tea from her BBC branded thermos. "Historical perspectives. Morrison interviews political figures about events they didn't live to see. It provides valuable context for our archival department." "Do people actually listen to it?" "Oh yes. We have a very specialised audience for post-mortem political analysis. Historians, political scientists, people researching the long-term consequences of governmental decisions. Morrison's show has quite a following in academic circles." That conversation should have convinced me to quit, find a nice normal job with a commercial broadcaster while the dead stayed dead. Instead, it made me realise I was working for the most extraordinary organisation in British media history. Over the next few months, I learned that Broadcasting House operates as more than just a television and radio centre. During the dead hours, it becomes a nexus for British broadcasting history, a place where every programme ever conceived, recorded or cancelled continues to exist in some form. Rule 2 became relevant during my 6th week. If you hear Lord Rife's voice over the internal tannoy, respond respectfully, but do not follow instructions. John Rife was the BBC's first Director General, the man who established the corporation's mission to inform, educate and entertain. He died in 1971, but his presence still permeates Broadcasting House in ways that go beyond mere historical legacy. I was calibrating transmission equipment around 3 AM when the internal announcement system crackled to life. "Attention all staff, this is the Director General. Please report to the conference room A for an emergency meeting regarding editorial standards." The voice was unmistakably Lord Rafe's, that authoritative accent, the measured delivery that refined BBC broadcasting for decades. But Lord Rife had been dead for over 50 years. Rule 2 was explicit. Respond respectfully, but do not follow instructions. "Good evening, Lord Rife," I said to the empty engineering room, feeling slightly ridiculous. "I'm Marcus Webb, night engineer. I understand you'd like to see staff in conference room A, but I need to maintain the transmission equipment." The tannoy crackled again. "Mr. Webb, very good. dedicated to duty is essential for BBC standards. However, I must stress the importance of maintaining editorial integrity during these irregular broadcasting hours. Yes, sir. I'll keep that in mind. Excellent. Carry on, Mr. Webb. The BBC's reputation depends on staff like you. The system fell silent. I continued my work, but for the rest of the night, I felt like I was being observed by someone who took BBC standards very, very seriously. The next morning, Patricia explained, Lord Rythe appears periodically to check on operations. He's very concerned about maintaining BBC values, particularly during the dead hours when our programmes become unconventional. What happens if we follow instructions? Staff members who attend his meetings never return to their posts. They become part of the BBC permanent archive, cataloguing programmes that exist outside of normal time. It's not necessarily harmful, but it's definitely permanent. Rule 3 nearly got me fired during my 3rd month. The archive on sub-level 3 must be accessed only with written permission. Some recordings should never be heard. Broadcasting House has archives dating back to the corporation's founding in 1922. Thousands of hours of programmes, interviews, speeches and broadcasts that chronicle nearly a century of British media history. Most of it is stored in the conventional archives on level 2 and 3, but sub-level 3 contains something different. Recordings that were never meant to be heard, programmes that were cancelled for reasons having nothing to do with the content, interviews that revealed information too dangerous for public consumption. I was looking for technical documentation when I accidentally accessed sub-level 3. The archive room was filled with equipment from different eras, 1930s recording devices, 1950s tape machines, 1970s digital systems, and machines I couldn't identify from any recognisable period. The recordings were labelled with dates, programme titles, and classification codes I didn't recognise. Operation Sea Lion, Alternative History Broadcast, 1940. Interview with Redacted, Cuban Missile Crisis Resolution, 1962. Children's Educational Programme, Future Events Warning System, 1973. One recording caught my attention. BBC News, November the 22nd, 1963. Alternative timeline. November the 22nd, 1963 was the day President Kennedy was assassinated, but this recording was labelled Alternative Timeline. I loaded the tape into a playback machine. What I heard was a BBC News bulletin reporting that President Kennedy had survived the assassination attempt in Dallas, describing his recovery and the political consequences of the failed attack. But Kennedy had died. The assassination had succeeded. This was a recording of news from a timeline that didn't exist. I was so absorbed in listening to impossible news that I didn't notice someone entering the archive room. Fascinating recording, isn't it? I spun around to find an elderly man in a 1960s BBC suit, wearing a press badge that identified him as Richard Dimbleby. Richard Dimbleby had been the BBC's most famous broadcaster, the voice that narrated royal ceremonies and national events for decades. He'd also been dead since 1965. Mr. Dimbleby, I said, trying to maintain some professional composure. I was just reviewing archival material. Alternative timeline broadcast, he said with the same authoritative tone he used to describe the Queen Elizabeth's coronation. The BBC has been recording possibilities since 1932. Every significant event, every possible outcome, every path history might have taken, we archive them all. Why? Because information is too important to be limited by reality. The BBC's mission is to inform, educate and entertain. Sometimes that means preserving the truths about events that didn't quite happen the way the public remembers. He gestured to the shelves of impossible recordings. Here, you'll find broadcasts from timelines where the Second World War ended differently, where the empire never fell, where Britain made choices that led to entirely different futures. All recorded by the BBC staff who understand that truth is more complex than history books suggest. But this isn't real. Dimbleby smiled. Mr. Webb, the BBC has been defining reality for British audiences since 1922. During the dead hours, we simply expand that definition to include possibilities that were too dangerous or too confusing for daytime broadcast. Winter brought new challenges to the broadcasting house. The shorter days meant longer dead hours, more time when the building operated according to rules that defied rational explanation. It was during December that I encountered Rules 7 and 8 and learned that some BBC programmes continue long after their presenters have died. Rule 7 concerned deceased presenters who might continue their programmes. Presenters who died during live broadcasts may continue their programmes. Do not cut their feeds. BBC presenters are trained to continue broadcasting regardless of the circumstances. Technical difficulties, breaking news, personal emergencies, the show must go on. Some BBC veterans take this dedication so seriously that even death doesn't interrupt their programmes. I was monitoring overnight broadcasts when I noticed something unusual on Radio 4. The programme schedule showed automated overnight music, but the audio feed was carrying what sounded like a live magazine programme. Good morning, I'm Sarah Jenkins and you're listening to Woman's Hour. This morning we're discussing the challenges facing modern working mothers, with particular focus on juggling career advancements with family responsibilities. But Sarah Jenkins had died of a heart attack during a live Woman's Hour broadcast in 1987. The programme had been traumatic for BBC staff. Listeners heard her collapse mid-sentence, followed by several minutes of dead air before engineers could switch to emergency programming. Yet here she was, 37 years later, presenting what sounded like a perfectly contemporary programme. Our first guest is Dr. Margaret Thompson, child psychologist and author of Balancing Act, Modern Motherhood in the Digital Age. The interview continued for what appeared to be a real guest discussing current social issues, workplace policies and contemporary challenges that hadn't existed in 1987. Rule 7 was explicit. Do not cut the feed. I listened to the entire programme. Sarah Jenkins conducted interviews with guests who seemed very much alive, discussing current events and modern social issues. But between segments, during the brief moments when she thought the microphones were off, I could hear her talking to someone else in the studio. Is this reaching them? Are people actually hearing this? A voice I couldn't identify responded. They're hearing it, Sarah. Your audience is still out there. I want to help them. These mothers, they're struggling with problems I never had to face. Technology, social media, economic pressures. You are helping them. Your program provides continuity, stability, a voice they trust during difficult times. The program concluded with Sarah's familiar sign-off. Thank you for listening to Woman's Hour. I'm Sarah Jenkins, and I'll be back tomorrow with more discussions about the issues that matter to women today. Except tomorrow never came for Sarah Jenkins, not in 1987, and not in any conventional sense since then. Rule 8 nearly caused a national emergency during my 10th month. If the emergency broadcast system activates without government authorization, evacuate the building. The emergency broadcasting system is designed to take control of all BBC transmissions during national crises, war, terror attacks, national disasters, situations where the government needs to communicate directly with the British public through official BBC channels. It was a quiet Thursday night in March when every screen and speaker in the broadcasting house suddenly switched to the same feed. The familiar BBC News opening music played, followed by a presenter I didn't recognise reading from what appeared to be an official government script. This is the BBC. We are interrupting all programmes to bring you an important announcement from Her Majesty's government. But there was no crisis, no government authorization for emergency broadcasting. According to the monitoring equipment, the signal wasn't coming from any official source. At 0300 hours this morning, monitoring stations across the United Kingdom detected unusual atmospheric phenomenon that may indicate extraterrestrial contact. All citizens are advised to remain indoors and await further instructions. The broadcast continued with detailed instructions for responding to alien contact, including communication protocols and safety procedures that sounded disturbingly official. Rule 8 was explicit. Evacuate immediately. I grabbed the emergency communications equipment and called Patricia. We have an unauthorized emergency broadcast, unknown source. Appears to be fictional content about alien contact. On my way, Patricia replied. Evacuate all staff immediately. This is a Class Alpha incident. As I rushed through the building alerting the skeleton night crew, the broadcast continued. Weather reports describing atmospheric changes that weren't happening. News updates about government responses to a crisis that didn't exist. Expert interviews about contact protocols with beings that weren't there. We evacuated to the emergency assembly point across the street. From there, we could see Broadcasting House continuing to transmit the impossible emergency broadcast to audiences across Britain. What's happening? I asked Patricia as we watched our building broadcast news from reality that didn't exist. Future Echo, she explained. Sometimes the BBC receives broadcasts from potential futures, events that might happen, could happen, or would happen under different circumstances. Usually they're contained to the dead hours, but occasionally they break through into live transmission. Are we broadcasting alien invasion news to the entire country? Only to people who are actively listening between 3 and 4 AM. Most of the audience is either asleep or assumes it's late night science fiction programming. The broadcast ended exactly 1 hour later, replaced by normal overnight programming as if nothing had happened. Does this happen often? I asked. Future echoes? Perhaps once a year. The BBC exists at the intersection of information and time. Sometimes signals from potential futures leak through. We monitor them, contain them when possible, and evacuate when containment fails. What if the alien contact actually happens? Patricia smiled. Then we'll already have the broadcasting protocols ready. The crisis came during the first week of December, approaching the BBC's New Year broadcasting marathon. Between Christmas and New Year's Day, Broadcasting House operates on extended hours, covering celebrations, retrospectives, and the transition from one year to the next. But the period between years create temporal instabilities that affect the building's relationship with time, reality, and the nature of broadcasting itself. All week, the signs had been building. Lord Ralph's announcements become more frequent, more urgent. Dead presenters appeared on multiple programs simultaneously. The archive on Sub-Level 3 began broadcasting recordings of events that hadn't happened yet. Emergency systems activated randomly, broadcasting news from timelines that didn't exist. But New Year's Eve brought everything together in a convergence that nearly broke the BBC's grip on British reality. It started with Rule 9. Children's programmes recorded after midnight must be destroyed before sunrise. The BBC had always produced children's programming, educational shows, entertainment programmes, content designed to inform and inspire young minds. But children's programmes recorded during the dead hours serves a different purpose entirely. At 2:30 AM on December the 31st, I discovered that Studio 6 was actively recording what appeared to be a children's educational programme. The presenter was someone I didn't recognise, a woman in 1970s children's television styling, speaking directly to the camera with an enthusiastic delivery that characterised BBC children's programming. Hello children, welcome to tomorrow's lesson. I'm Miss Penelope, and today we're learning about the exciting changes coming to your world. But the content was wrong. Instead of teaching letters or numbers, Miss Penelope was providing detailed instructions for surviving societal collapse, recognising propaganda, and maintaining independent thought during periods of authoritarian control. Now children, when the adults tell you that everything is fine, but you see evidence that it isn't, what should you do? That's right, trust your own observations and remember the lessons we learned together. Rule 9 was explicit: destroy before sunrise. But as I approached the studio controls, I realised that other programmes were broadcasting simultaneously. Lord Rives was delivering speeches about BBC independence over the internal tannoy. James Morrison was interviewing political figures about events that were happening in real time. Sarah Jenkins was conducting phone-ins with listeners who wouldn't be born for decades. Every supernatural broadcaster in the building was active at once, and their programmes were beginning to interfere with each other. The transmission equipment started showing impossible readings, signals broadcasting to the past, programs being received from the future, audio feeds that originated from nowhere and everywhere simultaneously. That's when the emergency broadcasting system activated. But this time, it wasn't broadcasting news from a potential future, it was broadcasting the truth about the BBC itself. This is the BBC. We interrupt all programs to bring you the real news. The presenter was someone I'd never seen before, wearing BBC clothing from multiple eras simultaneously. A 1930s jacket, 1960s tie, and 1990s press badge. For nearly a century, the BBC has served as more than British public broadcasting. We have been the guardians of information, the custodians of truth, the boundary between what the public knows and what they need to know. The broadcast continued with revelations about the BBC's true purpose, how the corporation had been recording every possible version of British history since 1932, how the dead hours were used to maintain communication with alternative timelines, potential futures, and voices that needed to be heard but couldn't be officially acknowledged. The BBC doesn't just report news, we curate reality. We decide which future of events the British public experiences, which truths are safe for consumption, which possibilities are too dangerous for acknowledgement. Every screen in broadcasting house showed the same impossible broadcast. Every speaker carried the same voice, and according to my monitoring equipment, it was transmitting across every BBC frequency, reaching every television and radio in Britain. During the dead hours, we broadcast to audiences beyond conventional reality. The dead, the displaced, the inhabitants that collapsed when history chose different paths. They deserve information too. They deserve the truth about what their worlds might have been. That's what I understood. The BBC wasn't just a broadcasting corporation. It was a reality management system, maintaining British society's relationship with truth, possibility, and the dangerous complexity of existence. The Revelation broadcast was revealing everything, every secret program, every alternative timeline, every impossible recording in the sub-level 3 archive. If it continued, the British people would learn that their reality was just one of many, that their history was carefully curated, that the BBC had been managing their perception of existence for nearly a decade. I ran to the main transmission control room, where Patricia was frantically trying to regain control of the broadcast system. "How do we stop this?" I shouted over the impossible audio feeds. "We can't stop it," Patricia replied, "but we can redirect it. The BBC has always had protocols for managing information too dangerous for public consumption." She handed me a key I'd never seen before. "Sub-level 4, the reality archive. There's a master control system that can contain paradoxical broadcasts." Sub-level 4? I thought sub-level 3 was the lowest archive. Sub-level 4 is where we store the BBC programs that were never meant to exist. The recordings of reality that were cancelled, timelines that were edited out of history, broadcasts from worlds that were deemed too dangerous to continue. I descended into areas of broadcasting house I'd never known existed. Sub-level 4 was filled with equipment from eras that hadn't happened yet, broadcasting to audience that existed in parallel dimensions, maintaining contact with BBC operations in realities where Britain had made different choices. At the centre of the archive was a control system that looked like a combination of 1930s radio equipment and technology that belonged in a science fiction movie. I inserted Patricia's key and followed the emergency protocols displayed on screens that showed information in languages I couldn't read but somehow understood. The impossible broadcast began to fade, replaced by normal BBC programming. The revelations about alternative timelines and reality management disappeared back into the dead hours where they belonged. The next morning, I found myself in Patricia's office, drinking tea and trying to process what I'd experienced. "The reality archive," I said. "How long has the BBC been managing all of this?" "Since 1932, Patricia replied. "Lord Rife understood that information is power, and power requires responsibility. The BBC isn't just Britain's public broadcaster, we're the custodians of British reality." "And the dead hours?" "Essential maintenance. During the day we broadcast to the living, keeping them informed about the reality they need to navigate. During the dead hours we maintain contact with the alternatives, the possibilities, the might-have-beens, the voices that can't be officially acknowledged but still deserve to be heard." She gestured to a wall covered with photographs of BBC staff from across nearly a century of broadcasting. "Every presenter, every engineer, every producer who's ever worked for the BBC becomes part of the system. Death doesn't end your BBC contract, it just changes your shift pattern. And the rules maintain the boundary between official reality and the alternatives. They ensure that the BBC programming serves its dual purpose, informing the living while serving the needs of everyone else who relies on our broadcast." Over the following weeks, I learned to work with the supernatural broadcasting system rather than simply maintaining it. I began to understand that my role wasn't just a technical maintenance. I was part of a reality management team that kept British society stable by carefully controlling their access to truth. The dead presenters became colleagues rather than anomalies. Lord Rife's announcements became guidance rather than mysterious instructions. The impossible archives became resources rather than forbidden areas. I still work at the broadcasting house. 5 years later, I've maintained transmission equipment that broadcasts to multiple timelines, archive programs that document events from parallel realities, and collaborated with BBC staff who continue their dedication to public service broadcasting long after their deaths. The rules are still there, still essential, still the difference between controlled supernatural broadcasting and reality-threatening chaos, but I understand them now not as restrictions, but as professional standards for managing information that transcends normal existence. The BBC's mission remains the same, to inform, educate and entertain. We just serve a much larger audience than most people realise. If you ever visit Broadcasting House during the day, you'll see exactly what you expect. Professional broadcasters creating programmes for British audiences, maintaining the high standards that have defined the BBC for nearly a century. But if you're ever listening to BBC radio during the dead hours, between 2 AM and 6 AM, pay attention to the programmes that aren't on the schedule. The interviews with people who died decades ago but still have important things to say. The news from realities that exist parallel to ours. The children's programmes that teach lessons about futures that haven't happened yet. And if you're thinking of applying for a job at the BBC, remember what I told you. Learn the rules, follow them absolutely, understand that you're not just joining a broadcasting corporation, you're becoming part of Britain's reality management system. The BBC needs people who can accept the truth is more complex than the news reports suggest, that information serves audiences beyond the living, and that some programmes require presenters who understand that death is just another kind of employment status. Sweet dreams, and remember, this is the BBC, serving all of Britain's realities, 24 hours a day.